Joseph Plunkett is a figure, he's rather like Pearse in some respects, in that he's a figure who sort of represents romantic nationalism. He's a poet, a literary figure. In terms of his own background, he comes from an interesting upper middle class Catholic background. He's a product also of quite a dysfunctional family with all sorts of tensions and stuff, and he's an intellectual figure, but he's also a kind of anxious, unstable, perhaps even neurotic figure in some respects. He represents, in terms of his ideological background, he represents the Irish Ireland strand within the Military Council. He was essentially a literary figure in the years before the Easter Rising. He edited the Irish Review, where he worked with Tom MacDonagh, and it sort of brought together a kind of a literary sensibility with a support for the sort of the volunteering and physical force movement which is emerging in this period. Now, in terms of his own work, his poetry and so on, you can see very clearly parallels with Pearse and also MacDonagh, in that there's a kind of an idealisation of romantic values. There's a sort of the sense of self-sacrifice, of dying for one's country and so on. It's a very kind of idealistic set of values that's being promoted. He had, for example, predicted his own death in his poetry, which MacDonagh's and Pearse's work also touches on. So there's a kind of a romantic sensibility of looking forward to what will happen. People were also, of course, quick to point out that Plunkett himself, as well as dying for Ireland, had TB. So in terms of his own physical health, he was likely to die at some early point. Now, Plunkett was an early supporter of the Irish Volunteers. He was a member of the Provisional Committee when it was founded. And he had played an important role in the Volunteers getting off the ground. His own family property in Kimmage, for example, became a kind of a camp for what they described as the first standing army of the Irish Volunteers, as figures from Britain would come over and start training and live there permanently, figures such as Michael Collins. Plunkett became Director of Military Operations of the Irish Volunteers in 1914, and that made him a very useful figure, and it helps to explain why he's appointed onto the Military Committee, because again he's in a key position in the Volunteers, so he can hope to bring the Volunteers into the Easter Rising when it's called. He joins the IRB in 1915. And when he's appointed onto the Military Council. And Plunkett also plays another important role, as well as bringing the volunteers to within the Military Council. He plays an important role in formulating, with Roger Casement, the Ireland Plan, and that saw him go to Germany to try and persuade the German authorities to support an Easter Rising. He presented them with a very ambitious plan, in which the Germans, as it turned out, were not willing to support in its entirety, but they did agree to send some rifles and weapons. So it was a kind of a limited success. And so Plunkett, like Pearse and Kant, forms the main group around which the Military Council begins.